on this. There you go. We are March 20th, 2023. We are talking about Parashat Vayikra. Vayikra, starting the new book of Vayikra, the third book, and taking a slightly different approach than I normally do. And that has to do with the fact that last week I really got swept up in preparing my Parsha sheet and analyzing Midrashim. I was, at the beginning of the week, I had one topic. At the end of the week, I had another topic about the end. I talked about the exuberance, the song, the music of the Mishkan text. I really enjoyed talking about that. And by the end, I was thinking more on the artistic characteristics of the artisan and what makes the artist work. And I'm sorry. It all derived from a midrash, and I saw this midrash in a lecture by Aviva Zornberg at the Beit Avichai, and I put that the YouTube where to get that. So I'm thinking midrashically now, which is not it's not unusual for me, but it's unusual for this class because normally I focus on the text in these classes and try to kind of break apart these texts and really understand what they're saying. The other reason is Vayikra, and certainly this first parsha deals at length with sacrifices. We've talked a lot about that in the past, and it's not that I don't enjoy talking about sacrifices. I think that people don't enjoy necessarily learning about them. It's such a removed part of a world, and I keep thinking that it's actually so necessary to think about, because deep inside the structure of the sacrificial system are really very, very deep human impulses, not the least of which is violence, and not the least of which is necessity to and desire for proximity with God. And while the modality of sacrifice in antiquity is so removed from us, the prevalence and the predilection towards violence as an expression of human need is actually quite close. I find that the subject is so highly charged. It's not an accident that this is at the core of the Torah, because these issues really are at the core of what it means to be a human being, and the hint of which is that already invented at the beginning of human civilization, according to the Bible, and I mentioned this in my sheet last week, was music and metallurgy. The invention of musical instruments and the invention of metal are seen in the Bible as the first important inventions of humanity. And in this class that we interpret the Bible not literally. We interpret it, philosophically and metaphorically and symbolically. What is the Bible trying to tell us when the first inventions are musical instruments and metal? It's trying to tell us that the basic human instincts for creativity are for beauty and for violence. Because out of metal music instruments, you create things that make for the exaltation of beauty. You also make things that can spur violence, let's be honest. Music does that too. But with blades and knives, you would make implements that kill, that are also necessary for, mastery over your situation. So the fact that the Torah has that at the beginning tells us what's present within human nature: violence and beauty. predilection for music, peace, and violence, which is war. Anyway, that was the Midrash then. So I wanted to kind of take a different kind of, it's like going into a different pool. When you go into the Midrashic literature, it's like you are entering a different pool, a different universe of thought. And since we're also approaching Passover, Passover is much more of a rabbinic experience, especially the Haggadah. It's the experience of rabbinic dialectic and dialogue and interpretation that it is, a biblical experience. I, as you know, would love to read the Bible. I'd love to read the Torah story at the Seder, but the Seder is not designed that way. The Seder really takes into the world of the rabbis to create conversation. So, having said that, I want to share at least 3 different midrashim that try and answer the question: what do we imagine? What do we imagine when the first words of this parsha say Vayikra el Moshe? Vayikra el Moshe. He called to Moses and he spoke to them. Vaydaber. He spoke to them, to him from the tent of meeting. Okay, so it wouldn't surprise you that we have an hour on that whole verse. Okay, so here I'm going to put up the text, and we'll get started with an easy one. So this is in a string of interpretations. Davar acher, another thing. He called to Moses, Makativ lamala, regarding what is above, inyan parshat Mishkan, from the subject of the chapter of the Mishkan. Kasher tziva Adonai Moshe, as God commanded Moses. Okay, I'll stop there. So the rabbis are reading the Torah in a consecutive sequence. And as you recall, last week we completed the sanctuary. I said last week, reading the text, it's exuberant in the sense of every single item mentioned or every single stage of the creation of the sanctuary ends with a kind of coda. Kasher tziva Adonai et Moshe, Kasher tziva Adonai et Moshe, Kasher tziva Adonai et Moshe, making it akin to a song. Okay, so here this text starts Vayikra el Moshe. So the rabbis are simply saying, okay, so the sanctuary has been made Kasher tziva Adonai et Moshe, Vayikra el Moshe, and they're trying to link one to the other, and they're trying to say, well, right above this text, if you were to look at the text, the scroll of the Torah, you'd see right above it is the sanctuary and all the things that God said to Moses. So he says, here's the parable, mashal. We can state a parable. Lemelech shetivat avdo, to a king who commanded a servant, ve'amarlo, and told him, beneli palatin, build me a palace. Okay, so parable, God the king, Moses the servant, build me a palace. Al kol davar v'davar, on everything, shaya boneh, that he built. Haya kotev alav, he wrote on it. Shmo shel melech. Okay, so Moses, the servant is pictured here as building this structure, and he puts God's name on everything, which is remarkable. It's almost, I think the image is the stamp of the brickmaker. I once was interested in these things. I still am. My kids really make fun of me for these things. But near Campermont in the Berkshires, there's a museum of industrial history of, I don't know, Connecticut or whatever. And looking for things to do on days off, I would find the most obscure museums. And they suffered this from me. And so there was a museum that had a collection of bricks from the different brick manufacturers of the Hudson Valley, which is fascinating. Why? Because a piece of industrial history of the 19th century was that brick making was really a huge industry up and down the Hudson Valley, and all the brick manufacturers had their stamp on their brick, right? If you are inclined to this, you can see the different, stand there. I'm sure there are people who collect these things and have, collections of bricks from different manufacturers. This museum happened to have different stamps of bricks, and so it's like the seal of the king is on each item of the palace. Okay, so Shvaya Kotev Alav Shea Boneh Haya Kotev Alav Shmo Shamel. He wrote everything, the name of the king on it. Vaya Boneh B'Ktalim. He built walls. V'Kotev Aleim Shmo Shamel. And he wrote on them the king's name. Haya Mamid Amudim. He erected pillars. V'Kotev Aleim Shmo Shamel. And he wrote on them the king's name. Haya Mikareh B'Korot. He laid out beams. V'Haya Kotev Aleim Shmo Shamel. So it's actually the literary quality of the Midrash is quite beautiful. We have the walls, we have the beams, we have the everything that's there, right? The walls, the beams, and the pillars. Liamim, after several days, Nichnasa Melech L'toch Palatin. So the palace is ready. The king comes into the midst of the palace. When he goes into the palace, he sees his name on everything. Amar, he said, Kol hakavod hazeh. All of this, asali avdi, my servant did for me. Vani mi bifnim, and I am inside. Hu mi bachutz, and he's outside. Kira'o lo, call him, sheikanes, so that he could enter. Lefanai v'lifnim, before me and inside. And that's the end of the Midrash, okay? And it's lovely. It's such a gorgeous little midrash, which is trying to unpack one of the emotional layers of this text that I would not ordinarily see. Okay, I'm inclined. I would go straight to look. The text is going to talk about what you do about a sacrifice. This kind of sacrifice. There's this. The Korban Olah, the Korban Mincha, the Korban Hasham. There's a whole menu of sacrifice, and I'm really inclined, based on the text, to talk about the menu, okay? But the Midrash is taking me to an emotional, imaginative, and theological universe that's very different. It's a universe in which there's a relationship here. And the relationship is the relationship of the sovereign to the servant. And the sovereign has the loyal servant. And the loyal servant has been busy creating the palace for the sovereign. And you've got to go back to the imagination of the rabbis who see buildings like this, okay? These are texts. This is a text from probably an early stage of rabbinic literature, 3rd, 4th century, right, where Greek and Roman culture is present in the land of Israel. So I think this is an Eretz Yisrael midrash, Hebrew, of course, and they see monumental structures that were built at the behest of kings. This is after Herodian, the Herodian period. And if been on a tour, Herod created monumental edifices. So, could Moses do it all? Obviously not. But the person is saying, this is for the king. This is for the king. So even if he didn't build it himself, he was the team leader of it. He puts God's name on it, and so the architect and chief engineer and construction manager of this edifice is outside. And God says, bring him in. I want to be close to him. And the Midrash then is, I need my servant who has been so loyal to me, and I need now to call him in, because the communication now is a communication not of a sovereign to a servant, but of a beloved to an intimate. Okay, and that's what's going on here. Okay, there's a picture here. Imagines that we have this humble structure, this sanctuary, and that God invites Moses into the sanctuary, into the Ohel Moed, where God's presence was so dense that he couldn't even enter it. Now God invites him, and that invitation is gratitude, honor, and a sense of divine need. I need my buddy. I need my buddy. Moses is God's buddy. Okay? Any comments or questions from that? If not, we're going to go on. Go ahead, Ilana. Go ahead.
Are you going to talk about the size of the letters in the
I'm not going to talk. No, it's such a great. So in the word Vayikra, the letter Aleph, it appears is a small, like we would say, if the typeface of the Torah is 12 points, the Aleph, the last letter of the word Vayikra, would be in 6 points. Okay,
because there is a midrash.
There is a midrash that way. So I'll make reference to it in my last midrash, and it has to do with humility. There's humility that's involved there, and I have a text on that. So bear with me. Okay, so we're going to go to the second one now. So I just want to say you have a flavor here. Here's the balance of it. There's the analog of the mashal, similar. Kach when the Holy One, blessed be, said to Moses, "Aseli mishkan, make me a mishkan. Al kol davar shaya on everything that he made." Yakotev alav, he wrote on it, "Kasher tziva Adonai et Moshe," as God commanded Moses. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, kol hakavod hazeh asali Moshe v'ani mibifnim v'hu mibachutz. All of this honor Moses did for me, and I am inside, and he is outside. Call him so that he can enter. Lifnai v'lifnim. L'chach nemar vayikra al Moshe. Okay, let's go on. Here's another one. And here you'll appreciate, I think there's the humor of the Midrash that I think it has so shaped the way a Jew talks, the way, Jews within, a certain kind of language, certainly Yiddish is shaped by this, and certainly modern Hebrew is shaped by this. And I say, this is the Jewish language. Okay, this is the way a Jew talks. So the verse says, Vayikra el Moshe, and he called Moses. So, question, Ul Adam lo kara? And to Adam he didn't call? It says, Genesis 3. Vayikra Adonai Elohim el Adam. It says that God called Adam. Okay? What, you think Moses is so special? You don't think you're so special? God called Adam. Rather, Ella, Ein Gnai Lamelech Ledaber Imaruso. It's not unbecoming for a king to speak with his tenant. Adam, after all, after he was ejected from the Garden of Eden, before he was ejected, he was a tenant of the Garden of Eden, and after he became a tenant of the world. So God speaks to us. You shouldn't say it's beneath the dignity of God to speak to his tenant, right? But that's what Adam was. Adam was only that. Okay, next. Vayidaber Adonai elav, God spoke to him. V'im Noach lo diber, and didn't he speak to Noah? But look for Nemar, doesn't it say Genesis 8:15? Vayidaber Elohim el Noach. Rather, Ein Gnai Lamelech, it's not unbecoming to the king to speak lil nakdodo, to speak with his herder. Nakdodo, nice word. And what was Noach in the end? Noach was someone who gathered all the animals. So he herded all the animals into the boat. And so that's what his role was in the end. It's fascinating how the rabbis are constructing a kind of hierarchy of different important biblical personalities. Okay, Adam, the tenant, Noah, the herder. Vayikra el Moshe, and he called to Moses, Ula Avram lo kara, and Abraham he didn't call. Of course he called Abraham. He called Abraham. Actually, it says, and we could make a little, Vayikra malach Adonai el Avram, and the angel of God called to Abraham. Okay, it's slightly different, but it's the same idea. It's still God called to him. Rather, Ein Gnai Lamelech Ledaber im Hundaki Shelo. It's not unbecoming for the king to speak with his innkeeper. In what way was Abraham God's innkeeper? Because Abraham invited God in. Abraham invited God into his life and invited God into the world. And so all of these different positions they're not menial, but they're honored in a certain way. So God honors the tenant by speaking with him. God honors the herder, and God honors the innkeeper. Vayikra Moshe, and he called Moses, not like Abraham. Abraham, with Abraham it is written, Vayikra Malach Adonai el Abraham. Angel of God called Abraham, Hamalach Koreh V'adibur Medaber. The angel called and the word spoke. Now, this is hard to understand, but it's almost like saying, and here you might appreciate it because it has more of a kind of mystical or metaphysical kind of content. The word itself is a kind of object. So the calling is one act, but the word is like a packet, a kind of invisible energy packet, a photon, okay? That's what a dibur is. And that is what's speaking. That was available to Moses, but not to Abraham, okay? So we do have a kind of differentiation here between all of these important biblical personalities who each in their own way and in their own ability heard God, or God spoke to them, but we have established here that Moses is in a different league, okay? And this is, I think, one of the key foundations of Judaism, the understanding that, there are certain individuals, we're all special in God's eyes, but some people have just a finer frequency, a finer receiver of the frequency. So each of these, it's like AM, FM, shortwave, and who knows, SD, HD, they're high definition, okay? So Moses is the highest definition receiver of God's frequency, okay? Nevertheless, Rabbi Avan says, the Holy One, blessed be, said, Anihu hakoreh, I am the one who calls, Va'ani hamedaber, I am the one who speaks, as it is written, Ani dibarti afkirativ haviotiv v'itzliach darko. And so the rabbis are kind of coalescing a verse from Isaiah with this moment. You have Ani dibarti afkirativ. So we have in Vayikra, it says Vayikra Vayidaber. Here it's Daber Vikara. So he says, I spoke, I called him, I brought him, and he succeeded. So what he's saying here is, it's not the servant master relationship of the beloved servant. There's something here that's exceptional about Moses. So I would say the first midrash is about intimacy. The second midrash is about exceptionality. Okay, there are dozens of midrashim. I only picked 3. Okay, on what's happening here. Is it there's a divine need, or is it because this person is so exceptional? All right, next one. Rabbi Yoshua Sichlim b'shem Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Joshua Sichlim, in the name of Rabbi Levi, interpreted the text. Kitov amar lecha ale hena me'ashpilcha lifnei nadiv. So there's a proverb that says, it is better to be told, step up here, than to be degraded in the presence of the great. Okay, and here we gotta, even kind of translate that from English. Better that someone should say, come up, rather than someone should say, get down, right? And the proverb is saying to you, is creating a situation where you are going to be promoted, elevated, or denigrated, promoted or demoted, right? You're gonna which is basically saying better to be promoted than having assumed a state and then being demoted. Okay, that's always better. right? You don't want to make an assumption that you got the job and then to be told by, your boss, no, I'm sorry, you didn't get, someone else got it. It's better always to understand and to wait for the promotion than it is to assume that you are and risk the demotion. Okay, so then it says this: Rabbi Akiva taught this in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Azai. Lechak mimkomcha shnaim o shlosha moshavot v'shev ad sheyamru lecha aleh. Here they're talking about the Beit Midrash. Okay, the Beit Midrash was a hierarchical place, the house of study, where the best students sat in the front rows and the novices sat in the back. Okay, so there was literally a pecking order in the Beit Midrash, and you got to move. You got promoted in your seat based on your acuity, your talent, your genius. And similarly, I guess you got demoted if you did not show them. And that may have existed, in early university structures as well, that the best students were at the front and the worst students at the back. So Rabbi Shimon says, don't rush to the front place. Go think about 2 or 3 back from where you think you are. Shev, sit down, until they tell you to come. Okay, which is basically what they're saying is, hey, don't be so full of yourself. Be humble. Don't go up, because they will say, go down. Better that they should say to you, you got a promotion, and not say to you, red, go down. Hillel said this also. Hashpalati hi hagbahati. My downfall was my ascent. Hagbahati hi hashpalati. My ascent was my downfall. What is he? What is the meaning of who is like the Lord our God, who enthroned Amakbil Hashavan, Amashpili Levot, see what is below in heaven and earth? He said, I think I need to explain what happened with Hillel. Hillel started out very with humility. Hashpalati hi hagbati. He didn't start out in the back seat. He started out, he was so eager to learn, he put himself on the roof and he listened in. And the legend of Hillel is that one time he was on the roof and he was so eager to learn, he fell asleep on top of the roof and it snowed on top of him and they had to uncover him. And then finally they put him in the back and they elevated him, they promoted him to the front. But there was a moment where he got too not arrogant, but too much. And his moment of ascent was his downfall. So he says, my downfall, hashpalati hagbati, I earned my place because I was of my humility, and I lost my place because of my arrogance. Okay. Now we have this verse. Hamakbil Shavet, Amashpili Lirot, that's from the Hallel. Who is like the Lord our God, who enthroned on high, sees what is below in heaven and earth. Atamotze, you find. That when the Holy One, blessed be, revealed himself to Moses from the bush, mastir et panav, Moses hid his face from God. As it says, Vayaster mimenu Moshe b'panav. I didn't get a chance to perfectly translate this. Moses hid his face. He said to him, God said, go, lecha ve'eshlachach el paro. Rabbi Elazar said the hey at the end of the word indicates that if you don't redeem them, no one else was going to redeem them. Im en ata go'alam, en acher go'alam. It's to you, lecha. There's an extra hey there, lecha. Here, I'm going to bold it here. Normally it would be, not written this way, lecha. But he says the extra hey emphasizes that it's you alone, Moses. Moses, when God revealed himself, Moses hid. Didn't want to, don't. And then the hiding is perceived as humility. But God is saying to Moses, if you don't go, no one else is going to go. If you don't redeem him, I need you. Bayam, at the sea, Amad lo minatzad, he stood at the side. So God said, Ve'ata harem et matcha, and you lift up your staff. So the ve'ata is superfluous. It could have said harem et matcha, but it says, and you should lift up your staff. Uveka'ehu, and split the sea. Lamar, she'im en ata boko, if you don't split it, en acher boko, there's no one else is going to split it. Bisinai, amad lo minatzad, Moses stood at the side at Sinai. Because God said, Ale el Adonai, Lamar, God said, come up to God, saying, Im enata ole, enacher ole. If you don't come up, no one else is going to come up. Bo'ohel moed amad lo minatzad, at the tent of meeting, Moses stood at the side. Amar lo, God said, Ad matay ata mashpil atzmecha? How long are you going to belittle yourself? How long are you going to make yourself so humble? Ein hasha'a mitzapa elalach. This hour, the hour that's at hand, is calling out to you. Tedalecha, you should know, shu kein shemikulam lo karaha dibur ela leMoshe. That Moses, it's calling you now. Okay, I'm going to close it because I don't have the translation there, and I have the text, and what I want to say is as follows. All of these different instances, the instance where God first meets Moses, the instance where God says to Moses, you're going to split the sea, right? And the instance where God says, come up to the mountain. So at the bush, at the sea, and at the mountain, the picture that is imagined here by the rabbis is Moses like he's standing on the side. It's not that he doesn't want to, and it's not that he doesn't feel he's worthy, but he's pensive, he is patient, and he's humble. The humility of understanding maybe it is not me, and maybe there's someone else. So at the bush, God says, Licha, to you, go. I'm talking to you, because if it's not you, it's not going to be anybody. And at the sea, it's Ve'ata, you, because if it's not you, it's not going to be anybody. And at the mountain, it's Ale, you go up, because if it's not you, it's not going to be anybody. And now, here I am. Here's the sanctuary. What are you doing, Moses? Come on. You're gonna be that humble? You're gonna stay outside so long? I'm calling you. I'm calling you in. Okay, Vayikra Moshe. I'm getting you in. And so I love these three midrashim. These three midrashim reflect different valences of this moment, right? And the truth is, anything is quite possible here. We have the sense of, you're my buddy. We have the sense of, you're exceptional, and we have the sense of humility. And the humility, and now here I'm going to go to the Aleph. The humility is I think one of the key features. It's a theme that we are stitching through the entire stories of Moses, and it is encapsulated in the appearance of the Aleph. The Midrash, another Midrash, tells us that the Aleph is present there because the word Vayikra is actually Vayikor, accidentally appears to Moses, and not he calls to Moses, but Moses was told, put an Aleph in there to make it different, because you are different. And so Moses, instead of putting a big Aleph, put a little Aleph. That's a fanciful tale to which some commentators have a very strong reaction and say that's just nonsense. Okay, what it is Vayikra El. There are there's an Aleph that follows the word Vayikra, and this is to distinguish the two words. But I'm not gonna get into that polemic. What I want to do, though, I want to kind of say, so humility as the great asset of the great leader. The great leader is a humble leader, okay? And what's particularly evident in our recent era is that we don't typically find humility as the primary characteristic of leaders on the global stage. That's an understatement. Okay. I want to just take a moment then to reflect. I thought, okay, so of American presidents, who would be the one that you would think as the most humble? And don't take too long to think of the answer. It's going to be Abraham Lincoln. Okay. Right. I'm going to try. This is Doris Kearns Goodwin, who is a biographer, Lincoln biographer, and she is giving this TED talk, and it's a lovely, lovely talk. We'll listen to a few minutes of it, but first, John, you have a word. No? Okay. You're good. Okay. So I'm going to, I have the transcript on the side. Can you see it? I didn't put it in big print. I'm going to play here. I hope you'll be able to listen. If you, let me know immediately if you can't hear what's going on. Because you hear it?
So indeed, I have spent my life.
Oops, I'm sorry. One second. Can anybody hear? Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to slow it down. Hang on. Settings. No. Start over again.
So indeed, I have spent my life looking into the lives of presidents who are no longer alive, waking up with Abraham Lincoln in the morning, thinking of Franklin Roosevelt when I went to bed at night. But when I try and think about what I've learned about the meaning in life, my mind keeps wandering back to a seminar that I took when I was a graduate student at Harvard with the great psychologist Erik Erikson. He taught us that the richest and fullest lives attempt to achieve an inner balance between three realms: work, love, and play. And that to pursue one realm to the disregard of the others is to open oneself to ultimate sadness in older age, whereas to pursue all three with equal dedication is to make possible a life filled not only with achievement, but with serenity. So since I tell stories, let me look back on the lives of two of the presidents I've studied to illustrate this point: Abraham Lincoln and Lyndon Johnson. As for that first sphere of work, I think what Abraham Lincoln's life suggests is that fierce ambition is a good thing. He had a huge ambition, but it wasn't simply for office or power or celebrity or fame. What it was for is to accomplish something worthy enough in life so that he could make the world a little better place for his having lived in it. Even as a child, it seemed, Lincoln dreamed heroic dreams. He somehow had to escape that hardscrabble farm from which he was born. No schooling was possible for him except a few weeks here or a few weeks there, but he read books in every spare moment he could find. It was said when he got a copy of the King James Bible or Aesop's Fables, he was so excited he couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat. The great poet Emily Dickinson once said, "There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away." How true for Lincoln. Though he never would travel to Europe, he went with Shakespeare's kings to merry England. He went with Lord Byron's poetry to Spain and Portugal. Literature allowed him to transcend his surroundings. But there were so many losses in his early life that he was haunted by death. His mother died when he was only 9 years old, his only sister Sarah in childbirth a few years later, and his first love, Anne Rutledge, at the age of 22. Moreover, when his mother lay dying, she did not hold out for him the hope that they would meet in an after world. She simply said to him, "Abraham, I'm going away from you now, and I shall never return." As a result, he became obsessed with the thought that when we die, our life is swept away, dust to dust. But only as he grew older did he develop a certain consolation from an ancient Greek notion, but followed by other cultures as well, that if you could accomplish something worthy in your life, you could live on in the memory of others. Your honor and your reputation would outlive your earthly existence. And that worthy ambition became his lodestar. It carried him through the one significant depression that he suffered when he was in his early 30s. Three things had combined to lay him low. He had broken his engagement with Mary Todd, not certain he was ready to marry her, but knowing how devastating it was to her that he did that. His one intimate friend, Joshua Speed, was leaving Illinois to go back to Kentucky because Speed's father had died, and his political career in the state legislature was on a downward slide. He was so depressed that friends worried he was suicidal. They took all knives and razors and scissors from his room, and his great friend Speed went to his side and said, "Lincoln, you must rally or you will die." He said then, "I would just as soon die right now, but I've not yet done anything to make any human being remember that I have lived." So fueled by that ambition, he returned to the state legislature. He eventually won a seat in Congress. He then ran twice for the Senate, lost twice. "Everyone is broken by life," Ernest Hemingway once said, "but some people are stronger in the broken places." So then he surprised the nation with an upset victory for the presidency over three far more experienced, far more educated, far more celebrated rivals. And then when he won the general election, he stunned the nation even more by appointing each of these three rivals into his cabinet. It was an unprecedented act at the time because everybody thought he'll look like a figurehead compared to these people. They said, "Why are you doing this, Lincoln?" He said, "Look, these are the strongest and most able men in the country. The country is in peril. I need them by my side." But perhaps my old friend Lyndon Johnson might have put it in less noble fashion. Better to have your enemies inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. But it soon became clear that Abraham Lincoln would emerge as the undisputed captain of this unruly team. For each of them soon came to understand that he possessed an unparalleled array of emotional strengths and political skills that proved far more important than the thinness of his external resume. For one thing, he possessed an uncanny ability to empathize with and to think about other people's point of view. He repaired injured feelings that might have escalated into permanent hostility. He shared credit with ease, assumed responsibility for the failure of his subordinates, constantly acknowledged his errors, and learned from his mistakes. These are the qualities we should be looking for in our candidates in 2008. He refused to be provoked. He refused to be provoked by petty grievances. He never submitted to jealousy or brooded over perceived slights. And he expressed his unshakable convictions in everyday language, in metaphors, in stories, and with a beauty of language, almost as if the Shakespeare and the poetry he had so loved as a child had worked their way into his very soul. In 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, he brought his old friend Joshua Speed back to the White House and remembered that conversation of decades before when he was so sad. And he, pointing to the proclamation, said, "I believe in this measure, my fondest hopes will be realized." But as he was about to put his signature on the proclamation, his own hand was numb and shaking because he had shaken 1,000 hands that morning at a New Year's reception. So he put the pen down. He said, "If ever my soul were in an act, it is in this act. But if I sign with a shaking hand, posterity will say he hesitated." So he waited until he could take up the pen and sign with a bold and clear hand. But even in his wildest dreams, Lincoln could never have imagined how far his reputation would reach. I was so thrilled to find an interview with the great Russian writer Leo Tolstoy in a New York newspaper in the early 1900s. And in it, Tolstoy told of a trip that he'd recently made to a very remote area of the Caucasus where there were only wild barbarians who had never left this part of Russia. Knowing that Tolstoy was in their midst, they asked him to tell stories of the great men of history. So I said, I told them about Napoleon and Alexander the Great and Frederick the Great and Julius Caesar, and they loved it. But before I finished, the chief of the barbarians stood up and said, "But wait, you haven't told us about the greatest ruler of them all. We want to hear about that man who spoke with the voice of thunder, who laughed like the sunrise, who came from that place called America, which is so far from here that if a young man should travel there, he would be an old man when he arrived. Tell us of that man. Tell us of Abraham Lincoln." He was stunned. He told them everything he could about Lincoln. And then in the interview, he said, "What made Lincoln so great? Not as great a general as Napoleon, not as great a statesman as Frederick the Great, but his greatness consisted, and historians would roundly agree, in the integrity of his character and the moral fiber of his being." So in the end, that powerful ambition that had carried Lincoln through his bleak childhood had been realized. That ambition that had allowed him to laboriously educate himself by himself, to go through those string of political failures and the darkest days of the war, his story would be told.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there because then the rest of the talk goes to Lyndon Johnson, and Lyndon Johnson is not someone we would identify with humility as much as Lincoln. It's certainly a great part of the talk. So having just heard this I think it's a, for 6 minutes, such a remarkable little speech. And of course, if you've read the book or read anything that she's written, Doris Kearns Goodwin is really a remarkable writer and storyteller in her own right. So she is pointing out the qualities of Lincoln, and kind of, without saying it in that word, humility, what she's reflecting on is, well, it's integrity, and the humility, at least in the examples of, for example, I know that there are people that are stronger than I am, and I will put them around the table with me. And of course, there's multiple interpretations of that. And I think she said the uncanny ability to have empathy for others was at least one of the factors that made him into the great leader that he was. And knowing that he would live for the sake of his reputation and for being remembered, and that idea of how you would be remembered was kind of seared into him from the earliest age at the loss of his mother. That shapes him. So it's very interesting now to then kind of, the rabbis don't know of a Lincoln, but they do know of each other, and they do know of models of superlative intellectual ability, and superlative character. And what they might be doing here, and I'll say might, I don't think, I can't say definitively that they are doing this. They're projecting backwards onto Moses this quality that they have in their own kind of heightened culture, elevated culture of personal human development. Look, the Bible says, the Torah says explicitly that Moses was the humblest of people. I mean, it does say that. And there are ample indicators in the Torah of how Moses behaves with humility. But the rabbis currently stitch all of these verses together and stitch all of these stories together, and create a character sketch of Moses that is not only, as we saw in Midrash 1, God's beloved servant, and not only that we saw in Midrash 2, God's exceptional human being, exceptionally endowed, that makes him different from an Adam, different from a Noah, different from an Abraham, but has superlative intellectual and personal qualities. And then third, the idea of this humility, that Moses, even though he's got a very special place and he's an extraordinary character, until he needs to be called on, he is going to wait, and there's a patience there. And then God says to him, "What are you waiting for? Come forward. I need to talk to you." And that, I think, is remarkable. And all of that, you can see, all of that is a different world from the world, I'll just say, at least the world that I'm used to going into, which is, I would have told you about the different kind of taxonomies of the animals and the sacrifices and the text, the way the text is playing with each other, and lots and lots of technical detail about the role of sacrifice, the way that sacrifice itself condenses human desire for vengeance and violence onto an innocent sacrificial victim, and the whole idea of what it means to give, and the different keys in which the human spirit plays on. But all that is, could be for another time. This is, stuff that elevates us in a different way and shapes a religious imagination, so that, when you think about questions of leadership and questions of what constitutes, the magnificent leader. It's not the self as much as it is the understanding and the personal integrity. And it's always interesting to talk about these kinds of superlative characters, especially in our world, which seems to be certainly lacking from these characters, this type of characteristic on the global stage. People exist certainly on other stages, but they're not on the global stage. And I'll just get your reactions to that, or to anything here in this minute. How do you feel about taking a dip into these waters? What do you think? Go ahead, Bob, and then John.
Well, I think, first of all, it's wonderful to take the dip into those waters and to sort of see the world in a different way. What I'd like to kind of respond to is that I think the opening also may set the stage for how does one bring korbanot and do sacrifice. And I sort of trying to pick up what you said about art, or music rather, and iron. In many ways, as I listened to Doris Kearns, I was hearing Lincoln basically using the music of language and words, and the iron which is forged of will and his political skills, leadership, and also his humility to really, if you will, bring the Yetzer HaTov to win out over the Yetzer Hara and all that. And so I think that for me, listening to this, I see this directly relating to what this is all about.
I agree with you, in that it's very easy to say what I said at the beginning, which is that music is for peace and iron is for war. Of course, we wouldn't have any civilization without either, right? Without tools in the broadest sense, we would not be able to build anything. We certainly wouldn't have been able to, make bricks or cut down trees or carve, texts or make styluses, that kind of thing. Without the hardened metals, we wouldn't have been able to create anything. And in a sense, music is also a force for violence too. Without music, in the modern vein, it's the whole idea of, let's say, take a composer like Wagner. Wagner brings out certain things, and people who think about these things, connect the dotted lines from Wagner all the way to Nazism. It's not accidental. But before there was that, there's all sorts of connections between music and war. Certainly, the sound of the shofar is also, the sound of the trumpet, or the sound of the drum. These are sounds that can civilize, and these are sounds that can motivate people to war. John.
So can I just say, do you think these ideas you're bringing up might have been in the heads of the ancient rabbis and the people bringing the korbanot in some way? Because there were the Leviim singing, and you also had all kinds of implements there. It's just a question to speculate.
I think they may not have, they don't, we speak a different language, but they were attentive, at least the temple religion and the echoes of that were attentive to the role of music. And there is a thought that the singing was to drown out certain other kinds of sounds, to drown out the sounds of the animals, and how there's a certain play of that the temple itself, within the very central confines of the Holy of Holies and the inner, that's all silent. That's all. There's no sound, but the sound is on the outside, and all the tumult is on the outside. And the tumult is because there is a moment in the act of violence of both the slaughter and then taking the blood of the animal and putting it on the altar, that that needs to be mediated to a traumatized people who witnessed that. It's not easy. I don't care how many times you've seen it, it's still not easy to, maybe for a shochet, shochet has become immune to this, but onlookers who don't participate in this on a regular basis still have to encounter a moment, maybe it's a millisecond of terror when they hold a knife over an animal's throat and slaughter it. John, go ahead on that.
Well, number one, I think the Midrash is terrific. I love it. Secondly, about the Midrash about elevating Moses, I think the rabbis were very concerned about promoting virtue and to teach people to live in an ethical way, because they were kind of trying to create a nation themselves. And this was the way a community could work, if people would act this way. If people act selfishly, it's harder to have a community. About Lincoln, I think this is really interesting. He loved the Bible. He would recite it, but I don't know. From what I've read, he was kind of agnostic as to whether there was a God or not. He talked about God beautifully in his inaugural speeches, but my understanding, he was kind of a skeptic. But he was his use of the language was just unbelievable. And finally, about Wagner, well, we just saw Lohengrin yesterday. You have to, I think, separate. He was a horrible person, horrible, and the music, but the music, he was a genius. The music is beautiful.
Sure.
And he not only wrote the music, but he wrote the libretto, which is unusual, and he did all the stage directions. So I can understand why some people wouldn't even listen to him because of the way the Nazis used his music. But it's complicated. I guess sometimes if you looked at the ethics of certain artists, maybe you wouldn't ever know certain great works of art.
So it enters a whole, or kind of reminds us of a whole debate that that whole discussion of the art and the artist, and do you disregard the artist when you examine the art, and that's a huge conversation, we could go back to the question of what the rabbis are trying to create, what religious personality they're trying to create, and the broadest stroke here is that the rabbis are creating their culture in a moment of extreme powerlessness. It's after a great catastrophe, that is the loss of the temple and the loss of the Commonwealth. The whole political structure has been destroyed, and their genius was to try and answer the question: well, how can we attain power in a circumstance of political powerlessness? And so it's not an accident that they veered straight into the moral ethical realm, because they discovered, as the Bible really tells us, that that's where the power really lies. Power really lies within the cultivation of the human spirit. And as to Lincoln's, religion or theology, it's a big question, and I agree with you. From the biographies that I've read, they've not really remarked it. They did remark on his love of the Bible and his love of Shakespeare. He loved the language, and clearly the man was endowed with let's just say, an elevated human spirit that tried to see, something beyond just the transcended, reality. But as to his own personal life and his own faith, that's just a speculation. Alana, and we'll close.
This discussion reminds me of the expression ירידה לצורך עלייה.
Sure. Going descent for the sake of ascent.
It comes when we light the candles for Hanukkah, we go up to remind us to go up in mitzvot, or to go to go slowly with our being too aggressive.
Yes.
Sulam Yaakov, actually it says
Olim below your
Olim
dim.
Ve'ordim, Olim Ve'ordim. Right. So go up slowly. Take your time.
And I think it's a very interesting dynamic at play within the academy, and certainly within life, within politics, within family, within every way that we organize ourselves. Except Shuls. If you want to be president, we'll make you president tomorrow. For more or less. No, the point is that each moment of transition along the path towards leadership requires this tension of, do I belong there? Do I not belong there? Am I worthy? Am I ready? And that's ascent and that's descent. Okay. If you go too quickly, then you will be demoted. If you go not quickly enough, then we hope that someone will promote you. Okay. All of that is at play here. All right. Well, I'm going to miss you for a while, but I hope you all have a lovely next few weeks and a lovely pace.
Why are you gonna miss us?
I'm gonna be away next week. I'm going up to my son is coming in. You missed that part. So I'm gonna I'm traveling up to see my mother in person for the next couple of weeks. And then we have Pesach. So
for how long are we going?
how long? It looks like at least 3 or 4 weeks. 3 weeks, at least 3 weeks. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Safe.
I will let you know.
Family.
But don't
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was
Pesach.
very nice.
Okay.
Dr. Like,